My name is Mouyid Islam, and today I'll talk about the data-driven analytics to address the safety challenges in trucking industry. So, being the last presenter, I think a lot of the conversation has been explained and presented very nice way from the Thailand to uh, Philippines and also the North America, Canadian side. So the presentation outline will include background, some little bit of the background of where we are with the safety in the US. Study design is very important when we look at the data-driven approach and also look at the risk factor. So I will touch on a couple of example touching on human factor related to fatigue driving and also the roadway factor, especially the roadway design. You mentioned about the curb segment. So I will try to see what are the risk factors that lead to the injury severity of the crashes. And then I will touch on the next, what is next in the industry, what are the challenges, what we should focus in the North American context and given the data we have, and some concluding remarks. So starting with this idea and the concept that in the road safety, we have three major components. One is the driver, vehicle, and roadway environment. So in the driver component, human factor aspect, I think in the previous presentation, it is covered. We have a major risky factors. We have a fatigue driving because a lot of the drivers are long haul drivers and they are stressed by the fatigue, long driving, as well as the speeding because they need to deliver the product within the time frame, and also the impairment is also highlighted in the health and wellness of the drivers because of the medical marijuana and other substances that drivers use to have that the energy to continue the long driving responsibilities. And recently we are observing the distracted driving distracted driving and also the unbelted or unrestrained driving condition because of the the driver awareness and also the safety perception. From the roadway side, we see the roadway design, weather condition, and when it comes to the highway and rail grade crossing, that is also a risk factor in the trucking industry. And as I mentioned in the beginning, that the truck itself has an inherent risk factor because of its size, weight, mechanical failure, especially in the tire side, braking side, and also the cargo issues. In the US, we have a very robust system to monitor and inspect through the roadside inspection. So this is a very old study, about 45 years ago. The study is done, a tri-level study. We are familiar with this factor, dividing the factors in the human, roadway, and vehicle factor. But how much we know from the heavy vehicle space? Are these factors are same within the heavy vehicle space? Those are the question we face. And in the recent time, FMCSA, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, have done a in-depth study, data collection. That study is almost complete with the data collection, and they will be looking into these factors. So these are very important in our context in the data-driven approach. And as I mentioned, and the previous presentation also indicated, the internal safety challenges that heavy vehicle has from the human factor standpoint when it comes with the blind spot. Our first presenter mentioned about the ADAS system that support the blind spot awareness where the other vehicle could be looming in on the side of the road or the blind zone area. And also it is a challenge when it comes to the urban intersection, especially with the pedestrian and pedal cyclists. So they are very high, low profile, low visibility roadway user that driver may miss them to look at when they are turning with the high turning radii. And also we have the temporal and spatial challenging aspects like nighttime driving, rural setting because of the speed limit, and the level of law enforcement. And also we have the regulatory and policy issues. For example, our second presenter touched on the hour of service. It is very critical how the federal government is setting up the hour of safety and also the electronic automated emergency braking is another new aspect, new area that is coming into the heavy vehicle space. And our first presenter mentioned this. There are studies going on in the US. They're coming up in the public domain. A lot of the rulemaking is going on the automated emergency braking and roadside inspection. So just to give you a snapshot of where we are in the US in terms of fatalities and fatality rates. So as you see, over the last 10 years, the fatalities are increasing, especially if you look at 2020 to 2021. There was about 18% increase in the fatalities involving large truck. And when I'm talking about large truck, it is the gross vehicle weight rating more than 10,000 pounds. So if we convert to the kg, it will be 5,436 kilogram of the vehicle overall weight. So if you look at the fatality rates, fatalities involving large truck with 100 million truck miles travel, in 2021, it has increased about 7%. It is quite a jump from 2020 to 2021, and it is still increasing as you look at 2022. So about 2% fatality rates are increasing. Just to give you another level of information, large truck accounted for 5% of the registered vehicles in the US fleet and 10% of the total vehicle mile travel in the recent year, 2022. That is our official number we have. They estimated about 536,424 large truck involved in the police reported crashes in 2022 nationwide on the whole US. And about 9.6% of all vehicles involved in the fatal crash are large trucks. So these are official number you can see in the Google, and our first data indicate those numbers. Now look at the study design. So I will talk about not the machine learning, but I'm looking into the econometric standpoint, how we model the injury outcome, the driver injury level. We have we have 5 levels of injury levels in the police reported crash database. One is the fatal, incapacitating, non-incapacitating, possible, and no injury. So we group them to make the sample size bigger, to have a severe injury, minor injury, and no injury. So these are the outcome of the crash. But what are the factors that include that, lead to the crashes? So in the econometric framework, we have the left-hand side that has the probability of severe, minor, and no injuries, considering this right-hand side with the X vector that will comprise of the risk factor. I will touch on those. And another component is this element. This element will consider the variation in the crashes. If you believe every crash is unique, the factors contribute to the crashes are unique: the driver age, the vehicle condition, age of the vehicle, the road condition, lighting condition. If they are different, this factor is considering the variation in the observation in the crash data. So in this study, I will touch on the fatigue and non-fatigue. So we can compare the risk factor between those two driving scenarios. So as I mentioned, on the left side, we have the severe, minor, and no injury. And on the right side, we have all the independent variables that could lead to the crashes. For example, the spatial aspect, temporal aspect, environmental, roadway condition. This is just an example. There are a lot of other information in the data set we have in the US. The resolution and extent of the data is quite intensive. So moving to the next slide is the data elements we have in the crash data. As I mentioned, in the temporal, we have the week of the day, day of the week, the month of the year, and the time of the day. In the environmental, we have the lighting condition, daylight or the dark condition. In the geometry, we have the lane width, number of lane, section with the speed limit. In the vehicular section, we have the driver vehicle registered within the state. In this study, we have focused on the Florida crash data, rollover condition in the crash dynamics, and the driver component would have the distracted driver ejected if they are not completely belted in that scenarios. This is the crash data, statistically significant variable in the fatigue driving. And we have the non-fatigue driving. We have these variables that are becoming significant. Just to note here that the red text representing the higher likelihood of severe injury, that includes the fatal and incapacitating injury. And here also the similar way, the green text representing the variables that includes the lower likelihood of severe injury. So this is the contrasting. So one way to compare the risk factor is wherever we have a common variable in both cases, both of the scenarios, fatigue and non-fatigue driving. And if you look at some of the variable has common variables, for example, the shoulder width between 8 to 12 feet between fatigue and non-fatigue. So we can compare the risk factor leading to the severe injury. So this is just an example, and the data from the crash modeling indicates that the severe injury is having higher probability between the fatigue drivers compared to the non-fatigue drivers. And in this case, the Florida registered trucks are more likely to be involved, 4.4 times more likely to be involved in fatigue driving compared to the non-fatigue driving. Also, in the minor injury category, we see that Florida registered trucks are involved with 3.7 times more likely to be involved in minor injury compared to the non-fatigue drivers. Similarly, the shoulder width, 8 to 12 feet, it is representing the interstate facility, the highest geometric condition we can expect. And in the fatigue drivers, they are more likely to be 2.5 times more likely to be involved in the severe injury compared to the non-fatigue drivers. And another interesting aspect is the rollover condition, when the fatigue drivers are 2.5 times more likely to be involved in severe injury compared to the non-fatigue drivers. So it is giving you the sense of the comparison when the common variable is existing, statistically significant in both models, fatigue driving and non-fatigue. And that's how the study was designed. And we looked at Florida crash data from 2011 to 19. We found 16 variables to be statistically significant, and 5 of them are common between the both models. That's why we can compare. Again, the log likelihood ratio test, this is one of the tests we do in the statistical model to show the injury severity between fatigue and non-fatigue drivers are totally different. They are not same. And that's why in the study design, we designed the study should be separated from the very beginning with 2 separate data sets, fatigue and non-fatigue. And then we can compare them. That will be a fair comparison, and we can develop a baseline condition as a non-fatigue, and we can compare the risk factor that I mentioned here. And again, this study is not free from the limitation because of the police reported crash, and that is part of their level of understanding and training that they could code this crash as a fatigue driver. So there are chances of underreporting and misclassification. And just to note here that this study was published last year, and the paper was given the Best Paper Award at Transportation Research Board annual meeting in Washington last week. Another study that I conducted is very similar, and it is looking into the curved segment and straight segment. We know there are risk factors, but do we know the magnitude of those risk factors? That is all about this study. We'll look into that. So these are the variables involved in the crash data. We are looking into the North Carolina State Crash Database, and the red text indicates the higher likelihood of severe injury. On the CARB dataset, CARB data modeling, and on the right side we have the straight segment, and we also see there are common variables that has common between the two model, CARB segment and non-CARB segment, meaning the straight segment, and we'll see the magnitude of those. For example, exceeding the safe speed for the condition. It could be weather-related aspect, that is capturing whether the drivers were exceeding the speed limit for the safe condition. If it is raining or snowing, whether that speed is safe for that condition. So in both cases, we see it is leading to the severe injury outcomes. And just to give you the similar level of framework where the straight segment is a baseline. When we compare the curved segment as a risk factor, we see the roadway segment with the speed limit between 55 to 65. The severe injury is higher in the curved segment compared to the straight segment. And this is completely opposite direction. As you see, curved segment has higher likelihood of severe injury compared to the straight segment. Maybe it is less likelihood of severe injury. Similarly, truck trailers, it is mostly the semi-trailers. In the curved segment, they are 2 times more likely to be involved in the severe injury compared to the straight segment. So there are quite of the turning radius, and also the speed is also involved in the curved segment, as well as the lighting condition and the geometry. And the another condition is the exceeding the safe speed condition. Safe speed for the condition, it could be reflecting the weather condition, the snow condition or the rainy condition. So in the curved segment, the drivers are 14.7 times more likely to be involved in the severe injury compared to their straight segment as their baseline. So this is quite interesting to see the magnitude, how much likely they are involved in the severe injury crashes. Careless driving, for example, this is a qualitative indicator in the crash database, but what we see is the opposite direction. In the curved segment, there are more likelihood of severe injury on the because of the careless driving compared to the straight segment. Maybe it is more less likely to have a severe injury because of the other vehicle involved in the roadway space. So similarly, we looked at the state level crash data between 2010 to 17. We found 24 variables to be statistically significant, and half of them are common between the both segments, curved and straight segments. Likelihood ratio tests indicate that the driver injury severity between the straight segment and the curved segment are different. And there are more severe crashes happening on the curved segment compared to their baseline of straight segment. And there are always a possibility of underreporting the crash database and also the reporting policy. And this study is published in the Journal of Safety Research in 2022. So just the touch on the what is next. If we look at the data between 13 to 22, last 10 years, if we look at the truck drivers, those are our main focus group because they are driving the economy. They are driving the economy and the financial support for their family, right? And if you look at 2022, 2020 and 2021, there is a huge increase between these years, about 23% increase in the fatalities of the truck drivers, jumping from 823 to 1013. And similarly, as we see between the 10 years of data, between the pedestrian and pedal cyclists, they are also vulnerable road user, and those are mostly happening in the urban settings at the intersection where the truck driver could be blinded because of the blind spot, or because of the line of sight could be obstructed because of the A pillar, B pillar, and also the roadway profile. So it is also increasing between 2% to 6% between 2020 and 2021 and 21 to 2022. So there is an increasing trend we observe, and there are a lot of research need to be conducted. It is not quantified what are the risk factor, what going on with the injury severity and things like that. This is a very high level data as we see in the crash database. And next is the state level. Each state has its own policy, as we mentioned, own level of adoption of technology, driver population, roadway profile, the policies, crash reporting. So this is the profile of last 10 years of fatal crashes. As you see in the northern state, we have higher percentage of fatalities in the total fatality landscape. And also it is all over the states. As you see, the percentage is varying. So we may look at the state level crash data and also the federal level crash data, combining all the states to see what are the factors, what are the commonality, in terms of human factor and the vehicle factor and the roadway factors. So coming to the concluding remarks at the very last, as we started with the inherent risk factor of the vehicle, right? So we have the turning radii challenges, braking challenges, as the first and second presenter mentioned, and also the third presenter mentioned in that way, and acceleration, lane changing. Those are the inherent challenges from the vehicle standpoint, and also the driver perception of the sharing the road with the other vehicle. Most of the time, as the second presenter mentioned, most of the time the truck drivers may not be at the fault, but the other vehicle may be taking the risk taking behavior and cutting off the trucks because of the speed and also the lane occupation. So we see those kind of challenges with the truckers. And also, as I mentioned, the supply chain, they play a big role. In the US, we have 940.8 billion US dollar in the gross freight revenue in the trucking industry that play a huge role. And also, as I mentioned, and our three presenters mentioned, that truckers also support their family, bringing food to their table. So it is very important to adopt the safety culture in the trucking fleet. And the behavior-based safety management, it could start from the very beginning at the root level, in the company level, and also the driver training and the compensation process need to be addressed and accounted for the level of risks they do compared to the passenger vehicle drivers. As I mentioned, in the US and the North America, we have a huge data, and these evaluation process like ADAS in the first presenter and the health and wellness in the second presentation, we see that this is coming from the data. The data is producing at each level. So we need to understand the data and accuracy of the data and develop the models to understand what are the risk factors, their magnitude, and how we can mitigate those risk factors. And in the US, it is the new wave. We are looking into the safe system approach. It is coming from the concept of zero vision that is adopted in 1997 in Sweden. And we need to also consider the technology, like the first presenter mentioned, the AEB, automatic emergency braking, to the vehicle-to-vehicle system, or vehicle to the infrastructure, and vehicle to the pedestrian, pedal cyclist, vulnerable road user. And that all includes the data-driven analytics to understand where the risk factor is moving from the time it started and where it is going, how our technology is helping to mitigate those risk factors.